Hi, welcome to John Colter's Mountain Man Talks. Today, our topic is the French and Indian War. Now, a long time ago, after the three regions of the colonies had been settled, 1754, the French were establishing many forts in the Ohio River Valley. Forts put there to keep the British and others out. The British didn't like this. There was competition for North America, really nice real estate, by the way, between France and England. Now, France and England had been feuding and not getting along over in Europe. So it's as if this war spilled over from Europe into North America. Well, the French and Indian War was 1754 to 1763. And all kinds of things were going on in North America. The French had their Huron and I think Delaware allies, and the British had the Iroquois and the Mohican. There were so many Native Americans that tried to avoid the conflict, but yet the Europeans encouraged them to help them with rewards, etc. So, at the end of all this, the main idea is that Britain takes over North America and the French have to leave. How did that happen? Okay, the French, by the way, had signs on almost every 10 acres that you had to stay out of there by force of arms. The French had to give up their North American colonies. Now, the real conflict developed in the Ohio River Valley, when the governor of Virginia sent a 21-year-old Major George Washington, not that much older than you, into the Ohio River Valley. George set up a fort called Fort Necessity because he knew that the Native Americans and French were around. Sadly, George set up the fort in a valley, in a meadow, and it started to rain and things went badly, and it went even worse when the Native Americans and British were in the trees on either side of the fort, attacked the fort, and George lost miserably. Also out in the Ohio River Valley, George got in a little bit of trouble because one of his men had captured a French messenger envoy carrying papers, and he was a diplomatic person, and he wasn't supposed to be harmed. A Native American, I think it was the Half King or one of his friends, sadly killed the French envoy, and George Washington got in a whole bunch of trouble, and he had to go back and explain himself to the authorities. Well, later George Washington fights as a leader of the United States, or the colonial Continental Army, leading us to become our own country. So George starts out British, gets his experience, and later is chosen by the Continental Congress to lead us. But that's another story. So the French forts were attacked, and Major Braddock, okay, tried to write most of the British in red. British wore red, which meant law and order to the Native Americans. Red, if you see somebody wearing red. Braddock was defeated, but, and he also died, the British went on to win the Battle of Quebec. Now, the Battle of Quebec was crucial to winning this war because Quebec is situated on the St. Lawrence Seaway, which leads from the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes, and the French could no longer send supplies past Quebec. So the Battle of Quebec's a big deal in this. And when we give you materials to read, please read about the French and Indian War and the various personalities and people in it. So it starts out as wanting control of the Ohio River Valley. The French lose that. Braddock is killed. George Washington gets in trouble, later redeems himself. Remember that the British, this is important, the British have their allies, the Iroquois. The French have their allies, Native Americans, the Huron. Now, many of them spoke the Algonquin language and other languages. And remember, not all Indians are alike, but they were out to trap and trade and do the best they could. And that's where the term Yankees comes from, because it meant one who trades. So many stories, so many goods and bads done on both sides. And so the bottom line, after the French lose at Quebec, the Treaty of Paris is signed, and the French leave North America. Well, not everybody. The presence of the French military and government forces, the French people, many of them stayed, went up into Canada, stayed in Quebec. Many of them went down the Mississippi River and stayed at New Orleans. And those that had lived in Acadia started to call themselves Cajuns and adapting to that way of life. So if you can get a hold of some maps in your books, it will show that the French presence eventually diminishes. And there's a very good map that shows before and after. Hopefully you can see that the orange is the French, and then after the war in 1763, pretty much gone. So there's so much to learn. There's so many movies made about this war. The Last of the Mohicans might have been one, but we don't show that in class. So you'd have to ask your parents before you see that one. Lots to learn. Please read and learn about the French Indian War. And I'll invite you back to another Campfire Talk with John Colter's Campfire Education. Because I did know how to read and write as a mountain man. I carried 3 books with me. Not much else is known about me because I didn't write a lot down. Some of you need to write some more down too on your notes. So, goodbye for now. These are all fake props. Thanks for being here today.